800,000 in shelved allocated projects are they previous 2 years plus?
I haven't looked extensively into a particular time frame, but I have looked at what has been kept on the record as allocations granted, and they do extend back to the early 2000s in various time frames of expirations. And we're now issuing any allocations with just a 1-year time frame. So there is an ongoing expiration of previously issued allocations. So it's pretty dynamic as far as what group of that 800,000 will. Some of them will expire within a year, and others, according to previous agreements, which as they come up, you have to dig into it. So it's pretty dynamic. I would say it's not a large portion that is actually going to expire.
Director Flanagan, could you provide a list of those projects of the 800,000 and the probable date of need? And I know that some of these you may have to go back and call these people up and said, are you sure that you still need this?
Well, I thought there was a shelf life. Are you saying that the older ones may not have a shelf life?
Yeah, that's correct. That years ago, before our holy crap moment, the Department of Public Works issued sewer allocations out in giant chunks for entire developments. Let's say, for example, if a developer came in and had a 300 lot subdivision that they were proposing to build within the sewer service area, they would come in and say, I need sewer allocation for 300 ELUs. And the Department of Public Works would issue the sewer allocation for 300 ELUs. And so essentially that check was written, and so you got to subtract it from the balance, the account balance. And that was the policy for a number of years until we had our holy crap moment. At which point in time we said, we've written more checks than we've got in the account. We can't cover all the checks that we've accounted or that we've written. And so we need to launch an emergency project to upgrade and expand this wastewater treatment plant. But we got to do something in order to buy us some time, because it's going to take years to expand this plant. And at this current rate, we don't think we have years. So what do? We did a number of things. We launched the I&I effort. We've looked at not sending leachate from the landfill down to the treatment plant, keeping it there and treating that. We changed the policy for sewer allocation so that we no longer issue them out in giant blocks of hundreds, because that could be a 10-year build out. So we required developers to come in with construction phasing plans that show what is the rate at which they intend to build out that development. And then we would only issue sewer allocation in accordance with the construction phasing plan. So for example, if that fictional developer with that 300 unit subdivision came in, we would say, I need 300 ELUs of sewer allocation. We would say, show us your construction phasing plan. And if this construction phasing plan came back in and showed they were going to build 30 houses a year for 10 years, we'd issue them a sewer allocation for, probably 30, but certainly no more than 60 ELUs, enough to allow them to get started, but it didn't tie up all the other ones. And yet the allocations that were written prior to that change in policy, not only were they written in large blocks, but they also did not have expiration dates on them. And so that was another of the changes that we made, was to issue them in smaller blocks tied to construction phasing plans with expiration dates. And so gonna, what we're in the beginning stages of doing here is going back through, here's the list right here, going back through that list and scrubbing it and contacting developers and checking on the status and clawing back some of this sewer allocation that has been issued. So that's why, on paper, it says 800,000 gallons per day, but, we recognize that some portion of our projects that are dead. Some of them might rise from the grave at some point, but other ones are not gonna rise from the grave. So it's a process of going through and culling this list. We recognize that not all of that is gonna translate into flow, which is what causes me not to be too concerned with the fact that on paper, we've only got 200,000. That's what causes me not to be overly concerned with that commercial industrial scenario which I laid out. Because if that big power user did come in, I think, we've got enough in there that we could accommodate them.
The other questions I have, I'll wait until the end.
Thanks.
I'll just address real quickly on the situation that development will experience here in the very near future. There is a grandfathering clause that will expire as of May 4th, 2013, and a lot of these projects that will not make that date will have to go through and redesign their stormwater management to meet the current stormwater code. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will be completely not developed, but it'll certainly extend the time to when they would actually become flow. So
It could also impact their density to some.
it may impact their density as well, yeah. So there is some complexities that are really gonna affect this anticipated flow. And we know some of these projects have not met the submittal deadlines that we had written into code to guarantee their approval. So there are some that are gonna definitely be pushed off down the projected growth path.
Have you factored in the nutrient offset policies, regulations?
Accounting for growth, is that what you're referring to? That's not, those are still a work in progress.
Yeah, the simple answer is no. We know what that policy is, and we haven't factored it into our growth, but we know that it is something that will affect our sewer demand versus growth in the outside of the growth corridor.
In fact, I'm gonna say that if anything, it is likely to increase the demand on wastewater treatment plant capacity, because that's, it's intended, or, from the local level anyway, the intent of that thing appears to be deter growth on septics. And, what's the alternative? The alternative is sewer. So I would say, if anything, that accounting for growth policy is likely to increase the demand for wastewater treatment plant capacity as opposed to reduce it.
Right. What we saw in Mako, the cost of offset septic was very high, and there was no cost as far as the offset for connecting to an ENR system.
Right.
So there was a high degree of incentive for the builders to find places to connect to in our facilities. Otherwise, there was going to be tremendous offset cost on the proposed plan that we saw make, which is not final yet.
Well, I would propose there's always these unintended consequences that could apply to even the growth area. And, I would, just see, how that might affect even just current conditions in the growth area. Because Shannon Moore was the one that did the presentation. She showed, many projects could not be built today because of all the costs that would be included.
Were those projects on wastewater or served by wastewater, or were they out in the septic growth area?
Majority of them were probably out in the septic growth area, but I'm gonna check with her as well and see if she can see if there's any policies that would be affecting in this area as well. And you said that the projected, there is a projected increase in residential growth. I've been hearing that it's gonna be a slow recovery. So I hope your projections are correct.
Well, I think, Dave, if you'll go back to the graph there, I think I said, but I'll say it again, that I'm anticipating that this is gonna turn up, but I'm not expecting it to turn up at that slope. That the slope will be flat. In fact, I would say we're banking on it, we're counting on it. Okay, Dave. When some of you visited Seneca Point a month or two ago for the site visit, I had intended to have a discussion with you about what is this thing called membrane bioreactor and how does it work, but I suffered brain lock and forgot to do that. And so at this point in time, I'm gonna ask Jeff Cole to give you a brief minute or two tutorial on what is a membrane bioreactor and how does it differ from some alternatives.
As Director Flanagan indicated earlier, the membrane that was selected for this project is the GE xenon membrane. The particular one of theirs that we selected is what they call the Z-weed immersed hollow fiber ultrafiltration membrane. You can see from the photograph there, the membranes are actually a long strand with a hollow core, and there's a vacuum applied to that core, and the water is drawn through the membrane, filtering out bacteria, viruses, and suspended solids. What's unique about these is the pore size. The pore size of these membranes ranges from 1 micron to 0.01 micron, which allows them to filter out extremely small particles, resulting in an extremely clean effluent. These membranes come in long strands. They're hollow core. You can think of them as a straw with holes in the sides of the straw. And we do the same thing. You apply a vacuum to it and you draw the water through those holes in the straw.
Applying the vacuum to it, does it require a lot of electricity then? Is there an added cost more than usual for?
There is a cost to supply vacuum to electrical cost. Is it more than conventional? Maybe yes, maybe no, I'm not sure.
And what tests, what comparison studies did you do to choose the NBR?
What comparison studies did we do?
I think that's a little later on in the presentation.
Well, you've got NBR there.
They're starting with one, to give them a chance to.
What is the fiber?
The fiber is a polymer-based.
It's polymer-based.
Fabric.
Polymer-based fabric.
Yes. The xenon Z-weed comes in what's called modules. There's a number of modules in what's called cassettes. And these cassettes that contain the membrane that's actually immersed in the wastewater. There's provisions made so that these cassettes can be pulled out of the wastewater and serviced as needed. Any questions?
One question, obviously, the vacuum pulls the solids to the fiber. Does it have to be?
The vacuum pulls the clear water through
Yes,
the membrane.
but eventually the fibers will get clogged.
Yes.
Are they backflow still?
They are backfalls. There's several different things that are done to clean the solids that clog the pores of the membrane. One, it's aerated. There's an air bubble that transverses up along the column of the fiber that helps strip away the solids that collect in the pores. There's also a back pulsing. In other words, the flow is actually reversed for a short period of time, pushing those solids out of the pores. Occasionally, it's anticipated once every 6 months that the membrane will actually have to be taken out of service. Again, you can pull the cassette up out of the wastewater, and put it in a separate tank for chemical cleaning.
And what is the, shelf life or life cycle for that membrane?
We have a guarantee for 10 years and a prorated guarantee for the next 10 years.
So
So
these
the life cycle-
fibers, these units are gonna last 10 years, is what you're, got the guarantee on.
10 plus years, 10 to 20.
10, yeah, okay, so you don't have to replace any parts of them, that's pretty phenomenal, in this type of system.
So the cost is 40 million to, do the project. Did you factor in the cost for the process, for the electrical costs?
The cost data which we are going to show you is focused on the capital costs, so we don't have that data to present to you. However, we did, the perception is that MBR, requires more electricity and therefore the operating costs are higher. We recently participated in a webinar, that, I think, to a fair degree refuted that perception. What it showed is that in some circumstances, depending upon, and I think the variables were the flow and the climate, and some others, that in some circumstances, MBR is more expensive, but in other circumstances, it's less expensive. And while one of the different case studies that were presented, none of them matched ours exactly, we believe that our scenario is in the range of those whereby MBR was cost effective. In other words, no more expensive and possibly less expensive. That while yes, it does, the electrical consumption is higher, there are other cost elements where it's less expensive. I think labor, I believe, was one of them, and there's some other things. So that yes, the electricity costs are higher, but that when you factor in all the other elements there, in some cases it's less expensive, and in ours we believe it's no more expensive.
Who puts on the webinar?
That was that Water and Waste Digest?
Yes.
How often do they have to be backpulsed? You can just give me, I mean, is it an hour, is it a day?
It's
Is it
every 30 minutes.
every 30 minutes?
Yes, and the back hauls only last for
Yeah, a few seconds, right, I understand that.
And the question about electricity, yes, there will be higher electrical costs than what we're currently have at the treatment plant. But then again, this is a higher level of treatment, and regardless of whether you go with MBR or you go with some other form of E&R treatment, you're gonna see higher electrical costs.
Use the gas off the landfill.
Somebody's probably thinking, seaweed, that kind of sounds like seaweed, and I think that's by design, because I think somebody has concluded that, this kind of looks like a kelp bed. So I think that's where they came up with this seaweed, which is obviously a registered trademark of the GE Xenon Corporation. Is there anything else you want to say on that?
No, other than to say that is also one of the things that helps clean the pores in the membrane is the fact that the strands are not
Attached.
tight.
It's not a solid
They're
membrane.
loose in the, immersed in the wastewater and are allowed to move back and forth, and as they rub against each other and they flex, it helps shed those solids that have accumulated on them.
Could you, at this time, tell me why you were sold on this process? What led you to this process?
Good segue, thank you. Dave, let's go next. Now we're in the comparison of alternatives, which I think is what you're seeking. Okay, next. I guess the starting point for this discussion is to talk about what needs to be done out there at the Seneca Point wastewater treatment plant. And I've already told you that it's something you already know, which is that one of the things that needs to be done out there is upgrade the plant to ENR level of treatment. So that's besides upgrading the ENR level of treatment. But that is not the only thing that we, the Department of Public Works, believe needs to be done out there at Seneca Point, and we believe that it makes imminent sense to do these other things now as part of this ENR upgrade project. For example, the Headworks facility, some of you might recall that, that's the rather odoriferous, if that's the word. Eric's not here to help me on that one, but that facility at the very beginning.
We knew what you mean.
That facility is undersized. While the permitted capacity of the plant is 2.0 million gallons per day, that Headworks facility cannot accommodate a flow equal to 2 million gallons per day. That when the flows reach those levels, as they periodically do during major rain events, bad things can and do happen within the Headworks facility.
I believe the denitrification system that GHD said would be the most effective way to get to ENR included an upgrade to the Headworks as well?
The project does include the upgrade to the Headworks, yes.
Yeah, well, either way, I recognize there that you're gonna have to.
The second thing is that at the present time, and again, some of you might remember this from the site visit, is that each of those carousels at the present time only has one aerator, which if your flows are, at 1 million gallons per day and a 2 million gallon per day plant isn't a problem, because if that aerator goes down, you can just switch the flow over to the other carousel while you fix your aerator. But as the flows increase, as they go beyond 1 million gallons per day and approach 2, we're not going to have that luxury. And so that needs to be added, or in our judgment, additional aeration capacity needs to be added, and we believe that now is the time to do that. The treatment plant also has what I've called inadequate hydraulic capacity which means that different plant components can't accommodate 2 million gallon per day flow rate. And doing the MBR will take care of that problem. If we do something other than MBR, then more work is going to need to be done to address the hydraulic capacity issue. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that the scope of work of this project includes more than just upgrading to enhanced nutrient removal level of treatment. And it's our opinion that it is wise and prudent to address these other issues here as part of this project. And so in the next series of slides, what we're going to try to present is a side-by-side comparison. Here on the left is the MBR upgrade option, and then on the right is some type of an alternative filter system option. And what I'm trying to show with these yellow boxes is that this stuff needs to be done regardless of whether we're doing an MBR filtration system or something else. So these need to be the same, and that what's at issue here is what type of filtration system should be employed to get to that ENR level of treatment. Okay, next. Now, there's a lot of numbers on this slide, so I'm going to try to go somewhat slow through here. A couple of you have seen this. This is a variation of the slide which I used during the plant tour, the council plant tour. So for the MBR upgrade option, our estimated construction cost is $31.5 million, and in big round numbers, total project cost $40 million. That's come down a little bit in recent cost estimates, but those cost estimates, I don't think included adequate contingency, and so that's why I'm gonna continue to use this total $40 million total project cost number. Now, it is the policy of the Maryland Department of the Environment that they will contribute funding towards ENR upgrade portions only. They don't, as I think I said before, you know, MDR is one way to get to ENR, but it's not the only way. And frankly, I don't think MDE cares what technology we use. Their position is, you know, it costs what it costs, and they're not gonna fund any, they're not gonna give us any more money than that. And so we've gone through a rather laborious effort with our consulting engineer and the staff of the Maryland Department of the Environment to try to figure out what portion of this $40 million total project cost can be directly attributable to the enhanced nutrient removal component of the project. And the answer was $11 million. And that's flush tax money, Bay Restoration Fund money that county residents have been paying. That's Bay Restoration Fund money coming back to the county to be applied towards the cost of this project. So we're anticipating receiving $11 million in state Bay Restoration Fund grant money, some of which will go towards engineering, some goes towards construction management, some goes towards, most of it goes towards construction costs, but it goes for different purposes. And, you know, that's roughly a quarter or 25% of the total project cost, which leaves the county responsible for the remaining 75% or $29 million.
How will that be paid for?
That's the second part, through a combination of sewer user rates and connection fees, but that's the second part of the presentation.
And if they don't cover the cost?
I'd like to defer that discussion until the second part of the presentation with Mr. Maker. It is my opinion, it is the opinion of the DPW leadership team, however, that we, the county, should look more than one step ahead. That it behooves us to look several steps ahead. And so I think it's germane to look forward to the expansion cost. Because as I think many of you have heard me say before, this project, the MBR project as currently designed, lays the foundation for the future expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. At the completion of the project, yes, the permitted capacity of Seneca Point will still be 2.0 million gallons per day, but there will be components that will be built and put in place that will support or facilitate that next step to expand the plant. Another way that I have started to describe that is to say it includes a down payment on the future expansion.
Yeah, I understand that part, that with the MBR process, we're able to expand on the current footprint. That's your fear, that we won't have enough land to expand at a later date. And I think MBR, you have said, will allow us to expand to our build-out projected from our comprehensive plan. Is that 10 MGD?
Yes.
Okay. My concern through this whole thing is, what have you compared MBR to have chosen that? What pilot tests have you done? And as President Hodge had said, when he voted on the consent order, this doesn't obligate us to the MBR process. He hopes that DPW will provide the information, the data, that you came up, you can back up going to MBR. I haven't seen the information. I'm not a wastewater treatment expert.
Okay,
I
well,
know
let
that.
him finish the presentation, because I think.
But I need the information to base a good decision
I think
on.
he's trying to
That's
do
what
that right
that's
now.
the purpose of this morning's presentation.
Give him a
Maybe
little-
we're missing the target.
Give him a little bit more time to finish his presentation.
Okay, I hope it's coming up.
All right.
We'll see.
So if we look ahead to the expansion, which again, as you'll recall from the previous portion of the briefing, is our current best guess is that's somewhere in the FY19 to FY24 timeframe, or 23, is if we do what is included in the current scope, then the estimated cost to take that next step and expand the plant is an estimated $18 million. And that with MBR, that logical step is to go from 2 million gallons per day to 4.5 million gallons per day. That's what our consulting engineering has said. That's the logical step. Go from 2 to 4.5 at an additional cost of 18. So let's look at the cost to upgrade to ENR using MBR and expand the capacity to 4.5 million gallons per day. So that cost is the $40 million MBR project plus the $18 million for the expansion comes out to $58 million. But for that estimated $58 million, you get a 4.5 million gallon per day plant, which works out to be $12.90 per gallon.
Is that a good deal for a 4.5 million gallon per day plant?
We believe it's less expensive than the alternative, and which is, I'm going to try to lay that out for you next. All right. For an alternative filter system, a denitrification filter or some other alternative, the estimated construction cost for that is $21 million, and the estimated total project cost is $28.5 as compared to $40 here. Now, the state funding should be the same. Again, they don't care. I don't think they care what technology we use. They're going to give us the $11 million and that's it. So that would equate to 39% of a $28.5 million project, leaving the county on the hook for the remaining 61% or $17.5 million. However, that would not include that down payment on the future expansion. It would not lay the proverbial foundation that I have referred to. And so the expansion cost with an alternative is going to be greater. Now, our engineer has said that if we did an alternative filter system and stuck essentially with the current methodology, that the logical point there would be to go from 2 to 4.0 million gallons per day at an estimated cost of $29.5 million. So here, again, looking a couple steps ahead, if you add the estimated cost of the alternative project to the estimated cost of the expansion, you get roughly the same amount of money, but for that money, you get a 4 million gallon per day plant, which comes out to a unit cost of $14.50 per gallon, or 12% higher than the MBR. And so, yes, the MBR project has a lower initial cost, a higher initial cost, 40 as opposed to 29. But looking ahead, we believe it represents the best value for the county going forward.
That's $8, Scott?
Yes.
Director Flanagan, I mean, when it's laid out like this, it looks really impressive. Can you show me the costs that go along with each price here on the alternative filter system option?
I don't have a slide to show you here today, but we'd be happy to provide that.
Okay, I understand that, and that's fine. I just wanted to break down, just like you did for the MBR, and that's you have denitrification as your example,
No.
but you're saying all alternative filter systems would cost about the same.
Yes. If I could add just something on why the expansion is so expensive to go with our traditional method. Up on our drawing here, the orange is the proposed next phase of the project, the upgrade project. And this shows what the upgrade would be in yellow, or in green is the current upgrade phase. The green and orange are, the orange is the current upgrade phase, and the orange is the additional for our expansion. The one major factor that makes the going to the alternative filter system is that the neat thing about the membrane bioreactor is in your main treatment streams, those main aeration tanks. When you go to membrane bioreactor, you can run it more than about 2.5 times this concentration of mixed liquor suspended solids. So your sewage can be twice as strong in that tank. So therefore, when we go to expand 4-MGD, we don't have to build the biggest part of our facility. We don't have to expand that. We don't have to build those tanks. If we were to go to the alternate system, not only do we have to provide some more filters, but we also have to provide 2 more of those main treatment streams, and those run about $6 million each. And that's where the big cost savings are, because that membrane will let us get away from building those in the near future in the next expansion project. And that's really where all those cost savings come from, is we don't have to rebuild our main treatment stream in the middle of the project when we go to 4.5 million MGD.
So your decision was based on basically what the attributes were. It wasn't really tested on the current system?
No, they know that they can run the MBR at those rates. It's been run both pilot studies by GE, and it's been shown in the field that in an MBR plant you can run your mixed liquor at more than double the concentration, which allows you to just less footprint in your main treatment stream. You don't need to increase the size of that. You can run twice as much sewage through that main treatment stream.
And when you had decided to go with MBR over Biomag, I think at that time it was still not used as much. It was new on the scene, and since then Biomag has been purchased by Siemens, and larger plants are incorporating it, and it sounds like with positive results from what I've just in my research.
To my knowledge, as of today, there are still no large-scale biomag treatment plants in operation.
Not in
There-
Washington or
there may
Carroll
be-
County?
No, not in operation. They're contemplated to be constructed, but they are not in operation. Biomag is a relatively new technology on the scene. There have been some pilot testing done. There is several small package-type treatment plants that use it in industrial wastewater treatment, but there is no large-scale municipal wastewater treatment plant using biomag.
Okay, well, I'm pretty sure, I'll get back with you. Well,
I've had those discussions with the manufacturer, and they were unable to provide me
Okay.
with that information
recently?
within the last year.
Okay.
And that, if I could also add, MBRs have been around for 20+ years. They are a time-tested technology. There are numerous large-scale treatment plants that haven't used this for quite some time.
Okay.
Next,
And,
please.
well, if there, I saw in other facilities that they do pilot testing with different processes to see how well they work with the current system that's established. Why wasn't that done in trying different systems now?
It was done in Hagerstown. We went to watch pilot study in Hagerstown.
No,
As
I'm
far as
talking
the-
about Seneca Point.
As far as the membrane filter, there's no need to do a pilot study. There's numerous large-scale projects.
She's talking about
Biomag.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about just incorporating different systems. I think Queen Anne's County had done that with their system. They had 3 different processes. They rented the equipment, and they could have a printout on how well they did with certain effluent, certain sediment, whatever, phosphates, and then the amount of electric it would use. So you based on, you would have the information to provide, to show which one worked best.
We've, I am confident that we did our due diligence in investigating the membrane bioreactor. As Jeff has indicated, this as I understand it, MBR was considered back in '81 when, or what?
When we were first looking at replacing the Cherry Hill plant.
Okay.
It was late nineties.
Right, but at that point in time, the experts, weren't satisfied that it was a proven enough technology. Whereas now it's been in use long enough and is expanding to the point where it is a well accepted and proven technology. I guess the point I wanted to make is that I'm satisfied we did significant due diligence here in evaluating this MBR issue. In fact, before we took this plunge, we put Jeff and his then assistant on an airplane, and I think we sent you to Ohio and Florida in the span of like 48 hours or something to go visit a couple of MBR plants that were constructed and in operation in order to be able to get the real skinny from the guys who have to live with these every day. In other words, to talk directly to the operations personnel so that we weren't falling to the slick sales presentation, but wanted to actually get out there and talk to the folks on the ground. And so they went out there and did that, and we worked this long and hard, and I'm satisfied that we've done our due diligence.
I'm just curious how much pilot studies cost. Do you know how much Prince George's County spent on their pilots?
Queen Anne's.
Queen Anne's.
No, I don't know how much they spent.
I'd
but
like
I'm
to have that
wondering-
information.
I'm wondering, how unusual is it to do a study like this? Is it done all the time, or just it's too much trouble to set it up?
Well, as you'll recall, we were compelled to do a pilot study by MDE to see could the current treatment method meet ENR standards. And that cost us a year and a half of time. I don't know that I guess it cost some labor effort. I don't think there were any major direct costs, but the most significant cost that was associated with that was time. That it cost a year and a half on the project schedule, which meant we weren't going to meet the permit deadlines, which thus necessitated the consent order to revise the dates.
So how out of the ordinary is it? You don't really answer? No.
Next slide, please, Dave. All right, this is a pretty busy slide here, but what this attempts to do is to articulate what we see as the advantages and disadvantages of the two alternatives. That for membrane bioreactor, as you've heard me say multiple times, we think that represents strategic thinking, looking 4 to 5 steps ahead. We also believe that MBR represents the process of the future, that it is capable of achieving very high levels of treatment, because what's the trend line in terms of treatment standards? I'll give you a hint. It's not down, it's up, and MBR will be able to exceed the current ENR treatment standards. So it will set us up, we believe, for success if and when the Maryland Department of the Environment further cranks that dial down. In our mind, by our I mean the Department of Public Works, this one right here, that fourth bullet, allows the county to meet the projected 10 MGD demand, total demand on the current site. In our mind, that's critical, because MBR requires less real estate. It has a smaller footprint. The total projected demand for the sewer service area served by the Seneca Point plant is 9 million gallons per day, plus the 1 million from port deposit. So if you add those two together, that comes up to 10 million gallons per day. Now, an alternative method cannot meet that 10 MGD on that footprint. And so, under that scenario, right here, at some point in time, the county is going to be faced with a choice to either expand the footprint of the plant. That'll be problematic because of the amount of wetlands that are around there. Or I suppose it could say, well, we're at treatment plant capacity, so we'll hang out our closed for business sign. Or it could choose to site a new wastewater treatment plant somewhere. And as some of you have heard me say before, that would only be slightly less fun than trying to site a new landfill. And so, from the DPW perspective, a technology that allows the county to meet the projected total demand at build-out within the current footprint is critical. And so, that was a major, perhaps the major selling point in our mind on MBR, is the ability to meet that projected demand on the current site. Now, it could have been done on the previous footprint. It was doable, but it would have been tight. We concluded it would be better if we could add the Dunn parcel, so we went through the process, as you'll remember from my opening remarks there, and added the Dunn parcel, and that then forms the basis for this site plan. Because this site plan that Phil referred to earlier is the site plan at 10 MGD capacity. Actually, the engineers tell me that ultimately it's actually like 11.25 million gallon per day capacity, but our projected demand is only 10, so we've actually even got some spare on that. Because MBR treats to that higher level, that it would make that effluent better or more suitable for effluent reuse, which we hope we see that in the county's future at some point in time. We're at the point where we're getting ready to ask contractors to put bids together on this project in order to stay on that project timeline and meet the deadlines in the consent order. So with MBR, we believe it'll be aggressive, but we believe we can meet those consent order deadlines. Failure to meet consent order deadlines will result in MDE enforcement action and monetary penalties. And you've already heard my discussion about the lower future expansion costs. As far as disadvantages go, yes, it is a higher initial construction cost, 40 million versus 28.5. There is higher electric consumption that we believe will be largely, if not completely, offset through other cost-saving measures, and because of the larger initial construction cost, there is potentially a larger impact on the rates and fees. As far as an alternative, yes, it has a lower initial construction cost and lower electric consumption, and potentially smaller impact on rates and fees. But in our view, does not represent strategic thinking. It represents only thinking one step ahead, and if the council decides to not address those, remember those, that I think it was a yellow box with those other 3 bullets on there, if the council decides it doesn't want to address those problems and just wants to upgrade to ENR only, I'm going to call that thinking a half a step ahead. We believe MBR is the future. I've talked about the fact that this cannot meet the projected demand on that site and what the options would be at that point. It does have the higher future expansion costs. There's a fairly significant risk of missing the MDE's consent order deadlines because of the need to back the truck up and go in a different direction. There will be lost design effort. We estimate that an additional $1 million worth of design effort would be required to go in a different direction, and that there's likely to be about a 15-month impact on the project schedule if that is what is done. Next, we're coming down to the end here. As the first bullet says, county elected officials have historically had difficulty thinking strategically, particularly with regard to infrastructure, which is why we're here having this discussion today. However, we believe that if there is not adequate wastewater treatment plant capacity that's provided, then there's two possible outcomes for that. One is it could potentially contribute to sprawl if there is not adequate capacity in sewer service areas. Well, that growth could well be diverted somewhere else, or and equally or perhaps more likely, that could result in a constraint on growth, which could possibly also constrain county economic development activities. And I felt compelled to point out that that effort to use infrastructure to constrain growth is a possible motivation for some who are opposed to MDO.
Director Flanagan, don't some believe that we're supposed to have the infrastructure on the growth corridor to attract growth that will help pay for the plant? That, I thought that was the goal first. And using that kind of money to put the infrastructure in, I could see it happening. That should be a higher priority to do that first.
From the DPW perspective, the answer, it's not one or the other. The answer is both, because pump stations and pipe in the growth corridor without treatment plant capacity to accommodate the flows is useless. So, and I think that our wastewater CIP actually reflects that two-pronged strategy, that we're under this regulatory requirement to upgrade the ENR, but we also need to look ahead and anticipate the need to expand capacity. But at the same time, I agree with you that there is not adequate infrastructure in certain areas of the growth corridor, and that we need to move forward on that. And we are working on multiple projects that will do it. So I don't think it's one or the other. It's both.
Okay, and I want you to convince me of this NDR. There you go. Is you're committing that is the wave of the future? That is the process that there hasn't been any breakthroughs recently in wastewater technology?
I'm, Councilwoman Brunel, I'm convinced that nothing I say is going to convince you.
No, I want to hear your
that-
answer. That's not, that you're popping out of answering the question. Can I, go ahead. I'd
No,
like
I'll be happy to answer your question, but I guess I'm saying that I'm doubtful that anything I say is going to change your mind. Is it possible that there's some new technology that's just being developed right now, or that will be developed and fielded in the future, that will be the next big breakthrough in wastewater treatment? I think the answer is yes. I am sure that will occur at some point in time. Maybe it's biomag, although I think I would say I doubt it.
Geoframe?
But it may be something, I'm sure something else will come on, just like 20 years ago, membrane bioreactors were the new and at that time unproven technology, but experience has shown that they are now well proven, and that's where the industry is moving. But is MBR the end of the line? Probably not. I'm sure there'll be something that will come along to do that. But I don't think we have the luxury of spending another year or two doing pilot studies, investigating that. The clock is ticking.
No, we don't have that luxury. I understand that. We're down to two choices, as I see it. It's either the MBR or the denitrification, where we put off the expansion part until later. But going with the MBR, we will be, our resources are going to be limited to other projects. At Meadowview, when are you anticipating that major renovations are going to be done there? How much can we invest? And are we limiting our growth to one area of the county?
I would say no. Again, a review of the wastewater CIP would show that we are moving forward with projects in all the systems.
So is it MBR for Meadowview as well?
I think that's premature to say, that we have initiated a planning study to take a look at what is the future of Meadowview. In other words, what is the ultimate capacity of that as defined by the receiving body of water. In other words, how much effluent could that receiving body of water take using the current treatment standards, and how much grow, so how big could that plant get, and how does that compare with the projected demand? Is it sufficient or not? If it's not sufficient, then we will look at, okay, what do we need to do to make it sufficient? Does that include a switch to MDR technology up there at some point in time? I don't know the answers to those questions. We are just in the beginning stages of a planning study that's intended to look at those things. And our goal is to have that planning study done and have the answers in time to support the fiscal year 15 CIP process, which we're anticipating will begin at the end of this calendar year. So I look forward to having a discussion about that, a year from now.
One last question. I had thought that $1 million had been spent so far on engineering. How much, how was the $2 million extra spent? Was that on the,
Dave, if you go back to, slide 7.
Okay. Oh, is it 4? On page 4, yes.
Yeah, it's on slide 7 in the lower right.
So engineering design was actually $3 million. I thought it was, you had given us a price of 1. Okay.
The price of 1 is, if we switch gears, what would it cost to get us back up?
An additional, and that would be an additional 1 million over the, 2.7 or so that has been spent thus far.
We were in the million mark until we were told we had to turn around and cut and redesign the plant and go smaller. So that cost us almost $1 million to re-engineer the project to a smaller project.
Well, we weren't told that we had that option, and that's the point I'm trying to make, is we need more information. With the, looking at the, letter from GHD, I wasn't the only one that didn't realize that denitrification was the most inexpensive way we could get to ENR, that we had other options. Maybe you were presenting it and we just didn't see it at the time. I'm gonna go back to the August 16th meeting. Was that a recorded meeting? I can listen to that?
It was.
It was good.
Okay, I have a couple quick questions. One of the advantages of the MBR upgrade that you listed is better able to meet more stringent treatment standards in the future. I guess my question is, when we put the new MBR online, we'll be ready. We're probably a little over $1 million of actual use, and we'll be prepared for 2, right? Correct. Okay. Is your intention to operate the plant to meet the parameters or exceed the parameters?
It will be operated to meet the parameters.
Next question, what treatment system does Elkin use?
Correct.
Commissioner Hodge, I'd like to, Councilman Hodge, I'd like to expand on Jeff's answer to that. Is our intent right now is to meet the ENR treatment standards, but we believe that MBR will exceed them. And one of the ways of generating nutrient credits that can be used for different purposes is if we agreed with our regulator, MDE, to lower the treatment standards, then whatever the difference is would be nutrient credits that we could harvest and use for various purposes. And MBR will give us that option. We're not currently planning on doing that, but that's a good, that's a good ability to have, because one of the things, and we haven't you know, we haven't talked about it here this morning, but in order to expand the capacity here under whatever scenario you are, is gonna require nutrient credits. We're in the process of accumulating those by doing other projects, Carpenter's Point Sewer, etc. But MBR, if we had to dial that down in order to generate more nutrient credits that are needed to support an expansion, we'll have a much greater ability with MBR than we would elsewhere. And maybe that's a bullet that we ought to add there under the advantages column.
I guess I believe that the effluent that's coming out of the plant is probably cleaner than the water coming out of Pennsylvania down the river.
In some, at least in some respects.
Right. But if we provide cleaner water coming out of that plant, then we're required to, I think there's some environmental benefit to that, as well as an offset to something else. And I think that there is a good, you know, we're doing a good deed, but we're also hopefully doing it for good reasons where it'll allow us to do other things somewhere else. And I can just look down the road in a year and we get the policy for this offset for growth. I can just see it's going to be a nightmare for us to deal with. We think that the tier maps are a problem. We think these other things have come, but this offset for growth is going to be unreal, in my opinion. It's just going to be, it's going to make growth almost prohibitive unless we have some offsets from the county point of view to make it manageable. The town of Elkton, what treatment system did they use?
We use the US filter oxidation ditch combined with D9 filters. It's the Parks and Dinosaur filters.
And why did you decide you wanted to go in a different direction than the town of Elkton?
Again, there's a number of factors, one of which was footprint, what we could accommodate on site using filters versus what we could fit on site using membranes.
Perryville, does Perryville use a membrane system? I'm just told they did. I haven't been able to get a hold of anybody.
I know they use what's called a sequential batch reactor. That's their biological process. What comes after that process, I'm not sure whether it's membrane or not.
Are there any other questions from the council regarding the Seneca Point upgrade?
Well, just looking at the anticipated projection for growth at a 2.5% growth rate, we would have till 2030, 2035 before we would have to upgrade the system. And it would allow us to have more options in my, well, just in my talking with operators of treatment plants. And, you know, the people that are users of the system are going to see substantial increases in their rates. And I have a feeling that when the hookup fees and the rates don't cover the cost, it's going to have to be a long-term bond, which all of the taxpayers are going to have to fund. So it's, you know, I understand that DPW wants to make a long-term decision, and I commend you for that, but there's other priorities that Cecil County has as well, that we have to figure what is the highest and best use for that money, and keep that in mind with our options.
You've asked the Department of Public Works to justify more of their issues and how they came to be, but I'd like you to justify the 2.5% growth rate. I've never heard that from anybody else other than you. Would you please support, for the benefit of the council, would you please provide, not right now, but I'd like you to tell us how you came to be in the 2.5 growth rate area, because I haven't heard this. I never did believe what the state said that would happen in Cecil County back when we were doing the comprehensive plan. I thought that was a ridiculous number, and it just came to fruition where it's certainly back down. But I'd like to know where that 2.5% came up with, and I've insinuated to the executive and her staff to try to do their own analysis to revise what they believe will be the growth rate going forward, because I would like the professionals
And that's,
to do that.
I've just gotten opinions, I'll go ahead and forward these numbers to you, but I've asked,
And I think
Director
from-
Flanagan, hold on, I've also asked Director Flanagan to provide, also when he believes that we'll be at that point where we have to expand, or when will we reach 2.0, and he has not provided.
He did in his presentation today.
Well,
They-
I wanna see the numbers for those 800,000 allocations.
Yes, and.
And they're not, I need to see those.
I think they agree
Your numbers there.
that you'll go through that 800.
Yeah. Just show us the 800, or send us the 800,000 allocated, gallons
And
of product.
80%, being at 80% capacity, does the state of Maryland mandate that you have to expand at that time?
And, no, but what the state of Maryland requires, now I need to answer your question fully, you can't selectively pick my answer.
I'm not, I'm
The-
saying I agree with that number, that's what I said.
The state of Maryland requires when your flows reach 80% of your permitted capacity to develop what's called a capacity management plan. Now, they're gonna say it's up to the local jurisdiction to decide, you know, what do? Do you expand, do you hang out your closed for business sign? Frankly, from what I've seen, they'd probably prefer that. That's their hope, I think, for Cecil County. But, you know, that's a policy decision for you elected officials to make. Our goal, again, is to try to stay ahead of the demand curve there with regard to wastewater treatment plant capacity. But that's where if you're wondering where did that 80% number come from, that comes from that state requirement to do a capacity management plan when flows reach 80%. And also, we believe that will give us sufficient time to pull that expansion project off the shelf, dust it off, finish it up, move forward and build with it. But again, that goes to what is the slope of that curve? And if this curve goes back to that, then 80% might be too late.
Councilman Dunn, do you have any questions? Okay, let's move on to the next segment of your presentation.
We'll shift here, I think we need to bring up a different, presentation, and we'll bring up a different cast of characters as well. Oh, we got them warmed up there, Mike.
Send me an email when you've done your YouTube thing.
All you
I'm
need to
gonna
do
put a
is
link.
put on YouTube there, alreasin.
Oh, okay.
Alreasin.
I'll put a hot link in. I'm not gonna embed because that totally screws up my dialect readers.
This one. When I go home, I'm gonna upload it, but I'll probably only get the first hour, it'll take 7 hours for me to.
You ready?
Yes, sir, go.
Right out the Zoom.
Now, my pleasure to introduce Michael Maker from Municipal Financial Services.
Thanks, Scott. I'm a manager of Municipal and Financial Services Group. We're out of Annapolis, and most of what we do is utility rate study. So I have a fairly brief presentation, which I don't want
He
to do.
needs a microphone.
Move it in.
Cannot hear him.
No, move it in to you.
Speak up.
Better?
Yeah, closer.
Let's get the mic closer.
How about now?
Speak up.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through this presentation, and if you have any questions during, just stop me. So the agenda, I'm just going to go over some of the objectives and assumptions of the study. We're going to briefly touch on some customer and production or sewer usage summary, the revenue requirements, or what are the actual costs of the system, how much revenue is required to collect from your users, financial plans, so how we've set forth the next 5 years, rate design, and we'll do some sample bills, and are also gonna compare you to some other local utilities. And then what we're calling capital charges, you might also call them connection charges or major facility fees. So there's the objectives of the study. The main objective, is keep rates low and fees low over time. The key there is over time. You can defer maintenance now, and then you may need a large increase sometime down the road. So our key is to keep rates and fees low over time. A necessary review of the fund to ensure continued stability and financial health. As we know, long-term financial planning based on both operating and capital costs. And then just to ensure the users of the system are appropriately charged for the cost of the county incurs. There's three basic assumptions, some guiding forces. The wastewater system, as you know, is an enterprise fund. It must be self-supporting. You cannot borrow from the general fund of that nature. The county is under a plan of growth based on growth. So that is, any existing users pay user fees, any new customers will then pay growth labor fees, which are connection charges.
Can I ask a question? We had a constituent come in, and he had said that with his rates going up, he believed that it would be for the expansion. I'm not so sure I agree with, because part of it is for ENR.
Right.
But if he's saying that he would challenge this, and there's been precedent set that he could get some of his money back.
Yeah, in the financial model we built, we actually allow you to allocate your existing debt, your projected capital expenses by growth and non-growth. You can say what portion of the project is actually going to benefit existing users, and you can say what portion is going to benefit new users. So there's a financial model. You can do scenario analysis, you can play the assumption, and you can see the output of that. So we do segregate between new and existing users. Just the last assumption, good financial policy is to fund some reserves for unexpected costs and any repair and rehab of assets. So, next one. This chart here shows the flow of funds between operating and capital. So your operating expenses, those are your day-to-day maintenance, benefits, salaries, things like that. Those are all borne by existing users, so wastewater user rates. And then you have your capital expenses. These are your large, one-time or not so much recurring expenses. And you can either have system rehab, so that's your non-growth portion, or our system expansion, so your growth portion. The rehabilitation portion can either be cash or debt funded. You can take bonds or loans, and that would flow to user rates. And then the expansion portion can also be cash or debt funded, and that would be borne by new users. And then in red there you see an important note. If you don't set your connection fees at the level they should be, or if the growth does not occur as anticipated, then the current users would have to pay for those expenses. You have to collect them somewhere. So we're going to touch on now some customer data. This is a snapshot for fiscal year 2012. You have about 26% of your customers are non-metered and 73% are metered. In total, you have about 58 customers. And of those that are metered, about 95% of those are residential. Projecting those numbers forward, you can see the growth rates at the top, and this, as they mentioned, was directly provided by development, whether they're residential or commercial projections. So taking those customers and project those forward for the next 5 years, next fiscal years, 14 through 18, and then doing the same thing with actual production or usage. Total metered production in the county in 2012 was about 346 million gallons. Okay, so now we're going to go into the cost of the system, what we call revenue requirements. This chart here shows you the cylinder there. At the top, you have your bottom is the operating and maintenance expenses, and those are your. So here are your base expenses. You have to pay your day-to-day, benefits, salaries, materials, things like that, operating expenses. On top of that, any outstanding debt, so anything you're currently paying, any principal interest on. On top of that, any planned capital improvement projects, whether they may be debt or cash funded. And then if there are any contributions to reserves, and I'll go into those. That in total is your annual revenue requirement. how much you need to collect. You take out of that any miscellaneous revenue, so anything that's not user rates, and that gives you your net revenue requirement. And then just comparing that with what your annual revenue would be with current rates, with the growth built in, would give you either a shortfall or so. So the first expense, cost component is O&M expenses. Currently, FY13 is at about 2.9 million in expenses. And you can see how that pie breaks them down. The largest are on the right, and then going to one thing to point out here is that the model is assuming that 90% of your O&M budget is going to user rates, the other 10% is going to hauling fees, your septic hauling fees, and that would be there. So we go to the next slide. You'll notice in 14 we're showing a decrease, and that's because this is only the portion for user rates, so that's taking out the 10% going to hauling fees. There's a 2%, fairly minor 2%